the first ever conference in the UK for community transport was held in 1981, and it was said that, you know, nobody knew then how many projects there were, how many people would be interested in coming together. And actually, you know, a lot of people did come together, and that continued. So through a series of annual conferences, they then set up a magazine where people could share their issues, their ideas, things they were doing. So it's about creating common bonds amongst a group of organisations who, you know, they might be the only person in their town that's doing this. So their networks needed to reach beyond their town and their city to people who were facing the same issues and problems as them in other parts of the country. From that, a group of organisations emerged. So there was one based in Manchester, one in Scotland and London, and then in the early 90s they all merged together into what we now know as the Community Transport Association. So it was very much about testing people's appetite to come together to do things collectively. And like a lot of organisations, they tend to develop out of that. You get a sense that actually we could do more things all year round, and we need some people and resources to do that. There's a mixture. And I think, you know, when I was talking about how it all began, there wouldn't have been a great bandwidth between the smallest and the largest. But today, we've got small, sort of micro organisations run by a handful of volunteers that may be using their own cars, right through to kind of large organisations that would be running public service, public transport and public service contracts in big cities. So they, you know, we've got some from the very small right through to multi-million-pound organisations, but they've all still got what community transport is about at their heart. So yeah, I think in rural areas you would tend to get a mix, but that's where most of the small organisations would be. And there, the contrast, I guess, between rural and urban is in a rural context, you may be transporting people and offering transport services because people cannot access public transport or don't have a car. But you may be offering those services in rural areas because there is no public transport. And if it weren't for community transport, there would be no means of getting from one village to another or getting to the shops. So that's what life looks like in rural community transport. If you get into an urban area, generally, but not, you know, this doesn't always follow, actually there might be quite good public transport there. So some of the people who might have used community transport in a rural setting would then use the local bus and wouldn't need the specialist community transport provision. Most organisations would have high levels of volunteer involvement. Some of the smaller ones might have one paid staff member that would be the administrator or the office coordinator. Others would pay their drivers, particularly if they're doing contractual work. They would use paid drivers for that. So the two areas of employment tend to be in the management and administration of the organisation, and then drivers. And there may also be passenger assistants. If it's contractual work, they would tend to be employed. Where organisations are kind of running services through their own volition, so it's something they've set up, there's no contract or commissioner involved in that, it's done through their own fundraising, they would be smaller organisations and tend less to have paid employment. It would tend to all be done by volunteers. And I think that's how many of those organisations I was describing earlier, right up to the large ones, will have started. It would have been, you know, neighbourhood level, groups of friends, groups of neighbours, or people maybe who all went to the same church or something like that. And things would emerge from that. And it is about solving very immediate problems on their doorstep for the people they know and live around. And that, you know, that's all still there today. For us, it's very much about supporting those organisations to be whoever they want to be. And it's very much about health and the strength of those local organisations, and they thrive because of their local identity. And as a national organisation, it's about supporting that. Each of them will have a mix. They tend to be local organisations, so their main funding relationship will be with the local authority, be it a council or a county council or a local district council. And that will be where most of their contracted and grant funded work would come from. There would also be some traditional charity fundraising. They would put on fundraising activities and events, sponsorship. And they also charge an element of fares, most of them. So their funding model is designed to combine all those different funding sources. There are other government grants. So there's a fuel duty rebate, bus service operators grant it's called, and some of them will be able to claim that as well for running services. The way in which most community transport operators would work is to use a particular permit that says you're not allowed to make a profit. So all of their funding and the way in which their services are designed and delivered, you can only generate enough resources to run the service and perhaps make some in reserves, which is a contrast to, say, a for-profit firm that would be running transport on a profit-making basis.
But you would say most of them have some kind of government support, and typically that would be the local contracts with the local government.
Yes.
Some way.
Yeah. One or two in certain areas might have a relationship with the local health authorities as well, but there wouldn't be many. It would mainly be with the sort of local council for running things like home to school, special educational needs, transport, social care, transport. We are a relatively small organisation. We have around 20 staff. Half of those work in Manchester in the north of England, and the rest are dotted around different offices in different parts of the UK. So we've got people in South Wales, North Wales, Belfast, Edinburgh, and that really reflects the fact that transport is a devolved issue in many circumstances. So it will be the country governments in each of those nations that are funding and supporting community transport. So it makes sense to have people on the ground in each of those jurisdictions. Around half of our money comes from those country governments, and the other half we earn through things like membership fees, sales of training materials. We work with corporate supporters, so people that are suppliers to the industry would sponsor us as well. And also we run events where we're able to charge a fee. So we have about just over £1 million a year turnover, which gives us enough to do our work. We'd always like more, and are always looking for ways to grow our income through taking on new projects and activities. The answer to that would be, well, we're about the people who use our services and make sure they can access the places they want, need to be, participate in their community, be independent, get to work, get to vital services.
Live a good life. Yeah,
have a good life. Yeah, and not have their lives diminished by lack of transport. So we often talk about transport needing to be accessible and inclusive, and that's so everything else in life can be accessible and inclusive.
Exactly. Yeah.
So as the Community Transport Association, what we're trying to do is create a different environment in which community transport is understood and valued. So that's about championing the work that our members do. Also, we've got privileged insights into the worlds of people who would rarely or never use public transport, can't drive or don't own their own car, and it's their kind of lived experience that they have that we use to not just provide community transport, but try and influence what the whole transport and how society is organised, so those people do have mobility and are able to get to the places they want and need to be. As we're a network, we see our job is to work with our members and to organise activities that they couldn't do alone. So bringing people together to achieve things that they wouldn't be able to achieve on their own, because they're a local organisation, they might lack the capacity and scale to get involved in national initiatives. So that's where we would come in. Another part of our work is about supporting our members and raising standards. So we are aware that the confidence in and the Commissioner's desire to invest and support community transport comes from a confidence in those services being safe and run legally and run in a caring way. So a lot of our work is about working with our members to make sure they have decent driver training, that they have the right policies and procedures and practices in place, that their vehicles are of a certain standard, that they understand what the law is and what boundaries they have to work within, and that enhances the credibility of the sector, that we are all kind of on that agenda together. We are facing in a number of directions. One is that work in championing the sector, which is taking the message and the stories and the data and the ideas from the sector to government. So we work directly with the governments. We also work with the legislatures. So in Westminster, we've got an all-parliamentary group which brings MPs that are interested in community transport together. And that's very much about ensuring that whenever there's a conversation that wouldn't necessarily need to be about transport, certainly unlikely to be about community transport, but whenever there's a conversation about something where our members can help, or they are aware of an issue, such as loneliness and isolation because of the lived experience of many of their service users, we will make sure that community transport is included. What we often say is the first line of a story, the first paragraph of a story won't be about community transport, but it's our job to try and make the second paragraph about community transport. So trying to make sure that we're tapped into lots of different public policy agendas, and it's not just community transport talking to itself about itself. Another facet is that idea that we bring people together. So actually, if we can create a space where our members can have better conversations with different parts of the transport network, be it the rail industry or bus operators, or talking to different bits of government such as the health service, then that's a role we would seek to play. So it would be typical policy and public affairs activities, producing papers, responding to government consultations, watching the news, tabling questions, or supporting members of Parliament and members of the legislatures to table questions, to be involved in the development of legislation. So we've just had a Transport Act in Scotland, and we're working with members of the Scottish Parliament there to ensure that that was mindful of issues affecting community transport operators and their service users.
So
I'd say you're doing the right thing, getting people together, seeing what appetite there is for collaboration, finding out what it is that everybody wants to be able to do together. And often it will be things that actually, organisations can't do on their own, because they might face issues around their capacity or their scale, or influencing national government might seem remote from someone who's in a community and their main set of relationships is with their sort of local government. So I'd also say it's about trying to set an agenda. There's a kind of typical way of setting an agenda of identifying a problem, identifying a solution, and building some political will to create some change. I think you've got the solution already. You've got all those groups, people out there who are delivering community transport. enabling the towns, villages to be more accessible because of the services they provide. So it's then say, well, what problems can we help address? We've got this way of working, group of enthusiastic people. What's going on in communities that we can help solve? What are public policymakers worried about? What outcomes are they trying to achieve that we can be involved in? Well, actually, we've got the solution. So it's about finding those issues and those hooks to connect community transport to, and engaging with policymakers and commissioners on those issues. So those local initiatives about where we would always say to try and build on the best of what's there already.
Yeah.
Often we're dismayed when there is an idea that something new should happen, and we always have to create a new organisation to do it. And I think actually there might be fledgling organisations or organisations who could adapt what they do.
Yeah.
So we would always say actually within those communities there will be someone who's doing something that looks and sounds like community transport, and how do we support them to develop and grow, become more sustainable.
Yep.
And you know, I think that those kind of initiatives, if you've got local public policymakers expressing that interest, and you know, it sounds like a really good opportunity.
Fantastic. Yeah. Well, I think it's lucky to imagine everyone applauding.
Yes.
Because I'm sure we're going to be very grateful to have heard your perspectives, not only the people present, but those that might watch online or later. So thank you so much for your time, and we will let you know, give you some feedback on how our day goes and how our journey progresses as well.
Yeah, well, I'd say good luck with the conference, good luck with all the initiatives you're developing together. Sounds like a great opportunity for doing something different. And I think that, you know, the fact that you've got so many people coming together and rallying around a common cause sounds amazing.